Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this Retail Strategies webinar, Money Matters, Funding Sources for Community and Economic Development. We are so excited that you're here joining us, whether that's live or via the recording, and we hope to make good use of your time today. Just a quick note, this session will be recorded and the slide deck will be provided to all those that registered. So don't feel like you have to have notes, take notes, stay engaged with us if you can. There is a chat box and also a Q&A box on your control panel. We would encourage you all to enter your questions, comment if you have experience with any of the things that we discussed today, and let's work together as we go through this topic that seems to be top of mind for city officials. So my name is Jen Gregory. I'm the president of Downtown Strategies at our company, Retail Strategies. And our company is familiar to many of you, but for those that don't know, we are essentially a community development consulting firm. We work in states from coast to coast, and we're really delighted to have registrants on this webinar from coast to coast. So a lot of diversity in those that are joining us today in terms of where you're located and also your position, whether you work for a city, economic development, and we even have some from the private sector today. Our firm focuses on all things community and economic development, but particularly retail, downtown revitalization, and supporting small businesses, which we'll talk a little bit about all of those today. We only have about 30 minutes together, so we're going to try to move through this fairly quickly, and our outline is on your screen. We're going to give a brief update on the American Rescue Plan and their flex update for cities. We're going to discuss CDBG, USDA, and utility funding. And don't worry if some of those acronyms are not familiar to you. We'll break those down today, and we'll also have a guide for you that you can download in the next couple of days that will hopefully kind of demystify some of those acronyms and terms. Then if you stick with us at the end, we will give you 8 steps to position your city for grant success. And a lot of you entered questions through the registration process, and that was a question that came up many times. What's the first step? What do we need to do to make sure that we are attractive to federal funding sources and other sources? So we'll give you those 8 steps, and then of course, feel free to drop in your questions as we go along. So the first component is the ARPA Flex update. And as many of you know, after the COVID pandemic, or really in the midst of it, Congress approved the American Rescue Plan Act, and in particular, a provision in which every city, town, village, and county in the United States of America was allocated a specific amount of funding, whether you asked for it or not. It came in 2 tranches. Most of you should have already gotten all of those funds by now. And this is something that has never happened in American history, probably won't happen again for the foreseeable future. So we have been advising cities and counties on these funds for the last 3 years. It's hard to believe that. And really making use of those and spending them in a way that there will be a return on investment. So just as a brief recap, there were a lot of papers and rules and documents that the United States Treasury pushed out that allowed cities and counties to understand how they could use those funds. Here are the eligible uses that were put out by the Treasury in 2022. Many of you probably are in localities with a population of 50,000 or less. So hold tight, we're going to get to that in just a second. But when ARPA first came out, these are the eligible uses that the Treasury provided: supporting the public health response, obviously COVID, masking, all of these things, expanding the public sector capacity. So really, this is your frontline workers and helping them with testing, with mobile sites, and things of that nature, water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. And my guess is that many of you on the call today have allocated a lot of your funds for this. But if you stayed to the end of this webinar, you'll also hear that there is another bill that was passed, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, where even more funding for infrastructure will be coming. So if you have not allocated all of your funds, maybe think twice before you put all of your eggs in that basket. Addressing the negative economic impacts of COVID. This is a big one, and this is where we saw a lot of localities prioritize economic development projects. premium pay for essential workers, and then replacing lost public sector revenue. We know that in some cases, larger urban cities lost money, sales tax revenue and the like during the pandemic, where some rural communities actually gained funds as people stuck a little closer to home. So that kind of gets us through the ARPA eligible uses of 2022. On August 10th of this year, so just a month and a half ago or so, the U.S. Treasury released its long-awaited interim final rule on ARPA Flex. And basically, this is 3 new ways that localities can use their American Rescue Plan Act funds, and they are: first, to spend money on providing emergency relief from natural disasters. Unfortunately, we have seen natural disaster upon natural disaster happen in all corners of the country. And so the government is prioritizing that as FEMA is actually running out of funds this fiscal year. The second Flex update is that funds that are spent on transportation infrastructure eligible projects and matching funds are eligible. This is really focusing on surface transportation primarily. And then the third is spending on any program, project, or service that would be eligible under HUD's Community Development Block Grant Program. We're going to go through CDBG in just a moment, but these are 3 new ways that you can spend your ARPA funds. I'm seeing that there are some comments coming through the chat, and really appreciate you guys doing that and being engaged. Yes, we are going to provide slides. Let us know, though, in the chat, have you spent all of your ARPA funds if you are a city leader? Are you still looking for ideas on this? Have you allocated all of these funds? Let us know where you are, and would love for all of our attendees to kind of chat about that as we move forward. What hasn't changed, though, through the ARPA Flex update are these 3 things kind of over on the right-hand side of the screen. First, all funds must be allocated by December 31st of next year, 2024. So you have to provide a plan to the Treasury of how you're going to spend these funds. And then second, the funds must be expended. Checks must be written by December 31st of 2026, unless that is regarding projects as it relates to the ARPA Flex update number 2, spending on kind of those surface transportation projects and Title I projects. That deadline to spend those funds is September 2026, but that's very specialized. And these allowable uses and standard allowance remain the same. So this kind of takes us through the ARPA Flex and the new ways that these funds can be used. Also important to note, if cities are going to be using their funds for any of these new opportunities, you can go ahead and be doing that. This ARPA Flex is sort of retroactive back to December 29th, which is a bit random, of 2022. So if any of that interests you, you can spend your funds on that. But most importantly, because I think looking at the registration list, many of the attendees on this session have a population of 50,000 or less, not all of you, but many. And so we want to remind you that the standard allowance provision, which you may have heard about last year, is still in effect. And this is the most flexible way to use your funds under the state and local fiscal recovery funds provision, basically all the money that cities and counties got. And if you'll remember, we did a lot of webinars on this as well, but basically non-entitlement units of government, NEUs, those with a population of about 50,000 or less, can spend their ARPA funds if they received $10 million or less, which is many of you, on just about anything that a local government would spend money on. Basically, any general governmental expenditure these funds can be used for. So that can be things like acquiring property, revitalizing your downtown, creating an incentive fund, buying police cars, buying police equipment, all the things that many of you want to do. Your ARPA funds can cover that. We're happy to talk with you a little bit more about that. But remember that even with this ARPA Flex update, the standard allowance still applies, and that's the most flexible way to spend your money if you received less than $10 million, this is what you want to focus on. And this is how you want to file your reports, is using funds under the standard allowance. Okay, so that was a quick breeze through ARPA. Thank you to those of you that have let us know kind of where you are in terms of your spending, what you're spending your money on, a lot of infrastructure, of course, but some other creative things as well. If you'll remember, in the ARPA Flex, they did mention that funds can be used for any project that would generally be approved under CDBG. Well, let's talk about CDBG, because I think this is, to me, the most important kind of component of funding that most smaller cities don't understand and don't feel like they can have access to. Community Development Block Grants, CDBG, are administered through HUD, Housing and Urban Development, the federal entity. And this funding, CDBG funding, has been around since the 1970s. Traditionally, it has been used for housing, cleaning up and revitalizing blighted areas. Kind of this was created during that urban renewal period back in the 70s. But then also for infrastructure and other economic development projects. So how do you get your hands on CDBG funds? There are really two ways, unless you live in Hawaii or some of the United States territories, which I don't think any of you do, because I did check that. If you live in the contiguous United States of America, these are the two ways you can get your funds. 70% of CDBG funds, which are federal funds, again, procured through HUD, 70% of those funds go to what are called entitlement programs. An entitlement community, basically, is one that is either an MSA, so kind of a metro area by definition, or an area, a city that has a population of 50,000 or larger. If you're talking about counties, that threshold is about 225,000 or above. Don't quote me on that exact number for population for counties. It's in the 200,000s. But for cities, an entitlement community is one with a population of 50,000 or greater. So if you're an entitlement community, you get CDBG funds already. You're eligible for them. You can put forth a plan of how you're going to spend those funds. And likely you have somebody on staff that manages the procurement of these funds, because as anyone that has dealt with federal funds knows, which we have at Retail Strategies a lot, they are ticky. It is very particular. So these funds are made available to entitlement communities. 70% of CDBG funds go directly to those entitlement communities. And also the amount that those communities receive is based on things like poverty, population, housing overcrowding, age of housing, and population growth lag. So essentially those communities that are distressed receive more. The other way, and this is most important, I think, for many of you on the call, is that the remaining 30% of those CDBG funds go to states. And the states receive those funding, that funding via a similar formula based on poverty, population, housing, and things of that nature. The states then put together a strategic annual plan of how they would like to see their CDBG funds spent. And then NEUs, which are non-entitlement units of government, basically those communities with a population of 50,000 or less, can apply to receive these funds as they fit into the strategic plan of the state. So we have a lot of states represented on this call: California, Washington, all the way to North Carolina, Florida, the Deep South, Texas, everywhere in between. We can't tell you every priority of every state. We just don't have time to do that today. But if you look on your state's website, whether it be their economic development agency, their Department of Commerce, they will have information about CDBG funding, the deadlines, and how you can procure that. Here's something else that I think is interesting. And basically it shows that as inflation ebbs and flows, and as time goes on, the amount of CDBG funding increases. So we are seeing more and more and more money being spent to sort of offset challenges in the economy. So there's a lot of money out there, basically, is the takeaway for CDBG, for ARPA, for all of these things. So really encouraging you guys to take a look at that. How can the money be spent? Well, there are 3 national objectives that all projects have to fall under. The first is the most prevalent, and you will hear it all the time as it relates to CDBG, and that is benefiting low and moderate income persons. LMI is the acronym for that. 70% of CDBG funds have to benefit LMI people. And there's a variety of ways to do that. I'm going to show you some examples of projects that have been funded in various communities using CDBG. So that's the primary use. Also, prevention or elimination of blight is another one. This one is basically focused on the built environment, buildings, public spaces where LMI persons may use that space. And then the third is a bit more rare, and it is addressing community development needs that are urgent, and they're designed only for kind of activities that alleviate emergency conditions. A pandemic is certainly one of them, but other kind of natural disasters. We do have some really good comments in the chat. Would encourage you guys to take a look at that. Bobby mentioned that may want to remind everybody that's never done CDBG that there are strings, that come attached to this. It can be sometimes more trouble than it's worth. And that's true. We've actually administered a CDBG grant or been affiliated with one before. There's a lot of tracking that has to be done. We're going to talk about, though, if your community doesn't necessarily have capacity to deal with that, which a lot of them don't, what you can do, because there are some kind of ways around that, but you're exactly right. Also, important to note about CDBG is that activities or projects may qualify for more than one national objective category, but if that project meets the LMI objective, file it under that, because 70% of funds have to be spent on that. So you really want to kind of prioritize that. There is a mapping tool, and Michelle asked that in the chat. Where is the mapping tool that shows the census tract level information? You can find that on HUD's website. We will link that for you in the downloadable resource that we create for you guys over the next couple of days, where you can look and see, if your community is completely LMI or if just certain parts of it are considered LMI, because that's something to consider as well. So we're getting some questions in the chat. What can you use these funds on? Well, here is your answer. Acquisition of property, relocation and demolition, rehabilitation of residential and non-residential structures, construction of public facilities, public services, activities related to energy conservation and renewable resources, and the provision of assistance to nonprofit and for-profit businesses to carry out economic development and job creation and retention activities. You will sometimes see CDBG used for industrial recruitment, but also we'll give you some examples of how this has been used on more of a baseline community development level. Ineligible projects, you can't build a city hall with CDBG funds completely. So you can't construct a building for the general conduct of government, political activities, campaigning, and the like, of course, certain income payments, and construction of new housing, with some exception. With housing, you're really looking at renovating blighted, housing for low to moderate income individuals in blighted areas. So a couple of examples of how folks have used these funds, both with us and in the greater community. First, Youngstown, Ohio, which is an entitlement community. So they got their CDBG funds directly. They partnered with Retail Strategies for us to provide small business support and training directly to minority businesses in their community, locally owned minority and women-owned businesses. It was a wonderful project that I was involved in. Perfect use of CDBG funds to directly train those LMI owned businesses, if you will. Here are some other examples that are a little bit broader. A historic railroad depot in a downtown was renovated into a community center. We got that question in the registration about community center, so wanted to pop that one in there. Florence, Alabama used CDBG funds for economic support to 69 locally owned small businesses during the pandemic. Arlington, Texas provided funds to help build a workforce center. That's another question we got in the registration. Ozark, Missouri, really happy to highlight this one as I'm very involved in the downtown program within our company. Ozark, Missouri did a downtown revitalization initiative in which 16 historic buildings were restored and 19 new offices and retail shops opened. Rock Hill, Texas, a smaller community, a historic textile mill became a new home for seniors. And in Southwest Virginia, a regional project, which we're going to talk about, they partnered with ARC, the Appalachian Regional Commission, to provide nearly $2 million combined for the Virginia Music Heritage Trail. So as you saw in the eligible projects list, these can be used for a lot of different things. But the big component is that it has to tie back to low to moderate income individuals. Your community may be LMI entirely. If so, you have a lot of availability. The state of Washington prioritizes their CDBG funds for facade grants in many ways. That's a great program, a great way to use those funds. So a lot of different ways to use these. We would be happy to help you kind of go through that and determine potentially, is your project eligible? We are not grant writers. That's not what we do, but we can help you, through a partnership. So, and always happy to have a phone call. The next one I want to mention is USDA, and this is a lot of different ways that USDA has funding for communities. But we want to tell you kind of one in particular, and then we'll list a couple of more. So the first one that we want to highlight is the Rural Business Development Grant, RBDG. I told you there are a ton of acronyms. Like I said, we're going to send out a glossary of these terms, but RBDG, Rural Business Development Grant, is a USDA grant. Retail Strategies has partnered with dozens and dozens of communities to help them get cumulatively over $1 million in funding for specific services through our company. So this is an entry-level grant. I do want to mention that this is a state-level grant. This is a lot easier to apply for and kind of go through the process than CDBG. There are people that can help you with CDBG grants, but if you're very, very new to this, USDA is a great place to start. So with the Rural Business Development Grant, these are grants that are primarily geared towards planning, technical assistance, supporting micro enterprises, which is businesses with less than 5 employees. And there are 2 types of funding for the RBDG. There are enterprise grants and opportunity grants. So let's go through each one. First, enterprise grants. You can see there's a lot more availability of projects and funding for enterprise grants. Opportunity funds, some of this is duplicative, but basically they spend all the enterprise money and then kind of there's the opportunity money left over. So things like training and technical assistance, like we mentioned, business counseling and training, market research, feasibility studies, acquisition or development of land, easements, right-of-way, construction, capitalization of revolving loan funds. This is great for your downtown. Community economic development, that's pretty broad, and feasibility studies and business plans. And you see with the opportunity funds, some duplication, but rural business incubators, leadership and entrepreneurship training, and tech and community-based economic development. So would highly encourage you to check this out. Again, we have helped communities get cumulatively over $1 million to partner with us on programs within our company, like Retail Academy, Downtown Strategies, and Small Business Support. So this is a great one to start with. We will link where you can go to drop down to your state to find out exactly what the parameters are. And these grants are typically due at the end of February. So now is the time to be looking into these USDA RBDG grants. We would be glad to help you through that. One theme that we are going to talk about at the end primarily, but it is one that I really want everyone to take note of, is regionalism, and partnerships. All of these grants are available, but generally, not always, but generally, one funding source is not going to fund your entire project. RBDG will, and there is no match required. So that's a great entry level one. With CDBG, there's not always a match required, but generally they won't fund an entire project, especially if it's a construction project or such. They will sometimes. But your grant application becomes so much more powerful if you can partner with other entities in your community, with other counties, and really work regionally. And how do you do that? You start to build relationships with planning and development districts, COGs, councils of government, regional entities like the Delta Regional Council, Appalachian Regional Commission, the High Ground in Texas, these kind of regional economic development organizations that can help you bring other entities together and put forth a very powerful application. Other grants through USDA, there are quite a few. Here is that link I mentioned where you can find your own state. We highlighted RBDG, but lots of other ones as well. And the last funding source we want to hit on before we give you kind of your 8 steps to get started on this is utility partners. And we got a lot of questions about this in the registration as well. Most of the questions we received were geared around who is the best person to reach out to your utility partners. And the answer is anybody that is in a public sector position. So we have a couple that we're going to highlight for you. One is Mississippi Power. Tamika Wiley is on our advisory council at our company. She's a great partner of ours, and she is the commercial development manager for Mississippi Power. She represents a large area, but does her best to build relationships with Main Street directors, mayors, chamber directors. So all of these positions are ones that should be reaching out to your local power company, not necessarily the president or CEO or board, but those that are in community and economic development positions, because their job is to form these partnerships with these positions so that there can be economic prosperity. More commercial businesses, more residential units with utility meters turned on, right? That helps them, but that helps the community as well. So Mississippi Power does a great job of providing grants to downtowns. They help procure data and consultants like us to help communities that are looking to recruit retail. They also even have a rebate program for putting electric vehicle charging stations in downtowns and on community college campuses. These are great ways to partner for real tangible results. Similarly, we have a partnership with Duke Energy, and specifically their program in Florida, in which we put on a summit for them, a next level retail summit, in which we shared trends and information related to retail, downtown, small business, and overall economic development. And their foundation, the Duke Energy Foundation, provided grants to some of their communities for specific revitalization and recruitment projects. So there are many, many others. We've had a very long partnership with Electricities of North Carolina, replicating kind of the same model. So really the takeaway is, as it relates to utility providers, is to build relationships with them and find out what the available funding is, and start putting projects together that fit their needs and yours. So we did a super fast kind of run through of these specific federal and state level funding sources. What's next? ARPA is going to be rolling off the docket as everybody spends their funds. As I mentioned, the next federal bill that is coming down has been approved by Congress, and that was the bipartisan infrastructure deal. That is focused on rebuilding America's infrastructure, the roads, bridges, rail, and also prioritizing electric vehicles. And so while that may not be prevalent in many rural communities, it is coming. And you want to have those charging stations in your downtown and in areas where people walk around and spend time. So be looking for funds coming down from this. Of course, we will do more webinars as this funding becomes available to let you know how you can get a hold of it and prioritize economic development in your community. So I told you if you stuck with us, we'd kind of give you a playbook, and here it is. These are the steps that we recommend to positioning your city for grant funding. And the first is one that many cities neglect, but it's probably the most important, and that is that you need a strategic plan. You need to draft up a strategic plan, whether on your own or with a partner, an economic development plan, whether that's for your downtown efforts, retail, just overall quality of life. You need to have a plan of what you want to do, because if you don't have a plan, these funding sources often don't come through. These entities want to see that you have more than just an idea, but that a true strategic approach, and that them funding your project is not just a one-off thing, but that it will enhance your community in a lot of different ways. Number two, determine your local capacity for matching and implementation. Not every grant requires a local match, but some do. So figure out, do you have the money locally, whether that's in your city coffers, whether that's economic development or tourism funds, whether you can raise that through the private sector, but figure out what your matching capabilities are. And then also figure out what your implementation capacity is. Do you have the staff to do something like this? If not, that's okay. There are still funding for projects that can benefit your community. But if you don't have the capacity to write the application and manage the project, all the more reason to kind of skip to number 4 and number 3, which is working regionally and working with partners that do have experience doing this. Planning and development districts, councils of government, they do this all the time, and they would love to help you, but you have to have a plan first. Number 3, identify those regional partner cities or counties. Who is in your natural region? What do you share in common? What are unique attributes of each of your communities or counties, and how can you work together for a common good? Number 4, build relationships with experienced grant writing entities. Writing grants can be difficult. We have done it. It is time-consuming and challenging, and it is a bit of an art. There are people in your region that do this and that are good at it. Partner with them. They may take 10% of the grant as a fee. Well worth it. And it enhances your chances of getting funded. Number 5, create a spreadsheet of available grants in your area with deadlines. These always take way longer than you think. So start early. We mentioned that the USDA RBDG deadline is February. Now is the time to start putting these applications together. And a very important part of number 5, apply for a DUNS number and a grants.gov account. This is a must. It takes a very long time because it's working through the federal government. It can take 8 to 10 weeks. It's a very minor fee. Do that today. If you don't have a DUNS number for your city or your local entity, create that today. Start the process. Number 6, set meetings with regional and state funders to review projects. They would so much rather hear your project ideas first and give you some tips on how you could change or strengthen your application than get an application and it have some things that are just red flags. They're always super happy to walk through these ideas with you. So feel free to reach out to them, set a meeting, tell them what you have in mind, but have a plan first. They don't like to fund ideas, they like to fund plans. Number 7, complete application and forms. So there are many very duplicative and boring forms that have to be filled out for federal grants. And if you do one little thing wrong, your application is not a lot of times accepted. Working with regional partners, sitting down with your state commerce department in advance will really help you through all of this. But set aside plenty of time to complete the application, the forms, and then submit for funding, review the feedback you receive, and repeat. If you don't get funding, that is okay, but go back to them and say, what could we have done differently to strengthen our application? Take note of what they say, and then go for it the following year. Many times, it just comes down to that there is limited funding. There has been so many good conversation in the chat. I hope you all take a minute to just kind of scroll through it. Thank y'all so much for sticking with us and for your comments and engaging. A couple of wrap-up items. I've gone over time, but want to let you know that this webinar is a production of our Governmental Affairs Task Force. At Retail Strategies, we have 14 people that are committed in their spare time to unpacking some of these opportunities for our clients and our prospects and community members. So I want to thank all of them and let you guys know that this is something that we are committed to and invested in. Lastly, scan this QR code if you would like to set up a meeting with us virtually to discuss projects in your area. Again, we are not grant writers. We have written grants for the RBDG grant for regional organizations, and we would love to talk to you about that for some of our existing programs. But let us know what's on your mind and let us know how we can help you. We do offer strategic planning services, and so we can help you with that first step. But also we want to just continue to share what we know in this industry and be a trusted partner of all of yours. So thank you so much for sticking with us. Thank you for joining this. You guys have been great. Couple housekeeping notes, because we've gotten this question quite a few times in the chat. Yes, we will be sending out the recording and the slide deck as soon as we can. So be looking for that. Check your spam if you don't get it in the next, by early next week, because it'll come from our company, from Retail Strategies. Also, we'll be putting together a downloadable resource that kind of summarizes what we talked about, talks about these 8 steps, and also gives you a glossary of these terms so that you can brush up on your economic development knowledge. Thank you all so much for joining us. We wish you a wonderful week and appreciate all that you do in your communities to make your communities and places better for your citizens and for all of us. Thanks so much, everybody, and you guys have a great day. Bye.